Welcome to another story made by Oracle One. The city never felt more claustrophobic than it did that late October evening. The rain had begun in earnest, a relentless drizzle that seeped through the cracks of the narrow street as Martin pressed himself against the damp brick wall, clutching the strap of his worn leather satchel. He was supposed to be heading home after a routine day at the office, but the flickering streetlight near the subway entrance was the first hint that something was off. The glowing yellow bulb buzzed faintly, casting an eerie halo over the concrete steps that plunged into the earth like an endless chasm. Martin glanced down the staircase, the concrete stairs disappearing into darkness, the edges slick with moisture. A chill ran down his spine as he hesitated, his breath visible in the cold air. The subway was usually a bustling refuge even at this hour, but tonight the entrance was deserted. No echo of footsteps, no faint rumble of trains beneath the city. Just the stairwell, yawning wide and silent. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket, but when he pulled it out, the screen was blank, the signal dead as though the city above was being strangled of all connection. He tapped the screen again. No bars. No messages. No calls. The small digital clock blinked on and off. He felt the gnawing sense of unease grow heavier. Swallowing hard, Martin adjusted his coat collar and stepped onto the first stair. It was colder here. The walls seemed to narrow as he descended, the air thick, stale, smelling faintly of mold and rust. The staircase was impossible to ignore in its bizarre endlessness. Each step matched the last, a never-ending sequence of concrete wounds into the earth. The glossy black handrail ran alongside him for miles, or so it seemed. Each breath echoed around him, sharp and hollow. The distant city sounds were gone, swallowed by the spiral descent. He tried calling a cab but found only the quiet hum of dead signals on his phone. He reached for the handrail intending to steady himself, and his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a small rusted plaque nailed to the wall at eye level. Martin leaned closer, eyes straining to make out the barely legible inscription through the grime. It read simply, 99 steps down. The words sent an unexplained shudder rippling down his spine. He glanced up, then back down the stairwell, feeling as if the steps stretched further than before. Where had this number come from? He had been counting steps since he started descending but had lost track after the 40th or so. Now this strange plaque seemed to mock him, like a warning or a mute invitation. The city seemed to vanish behind him as he continued downward, compelled by a morbid curiosity that wrestled with his growing fear. His fingers grazed the cold concrete on each step, rough shards chipping at his skin. The light dimmed even further. Around him, the walls wore faint shadows that crept like spiders. Suddenly, he heard it. A faint scraping sound, irregular and slow, echoing faintly from below. Martin froze, heart pounding. The sound wasn't mechanical. No distant train rumbled. No distant chatter of passengers. This was something else. Something alive or at least intent. The sound scraped against the side walls, like nails raking stone. Martin swallowed the panic threatening to surge and gripped the handrail firmly. The scrape came again, this time closer, accompanied by a low rumbling that vibrated underfoot. He forced himself to move again, each step a desperate battle to fight the bottomless descent. Thoughts tumbled like pebbles in his mind. How deep did these stairs go? How long had he been descending? The cell signal was dead since the moment he stepped on the first stair. He tried again, feeling the frustration and panic rise. The glowing green phone screen was dead silent. No alert, no network, nothing. Out of desperation, he flicked his flashlight on. The small beam barely cut through the suffocating darkness. Years of city commuting should have taught Martin that the subway was just steps away, but these stairs mocked that memory. They seemed to spiral and tunnel endlessly, unending and confounding. At the 98th step, Martin's foot snagged on a loose stone, sending him to one knee. He looked up, grasping the rail, breath ragged. Ahead, in the darkness, was a faint flicker of dull yellow light. It wavered like the last breath of a dying flame. With trembling hands, Martin forced himself to stand and climb the final step. 99 steps down. Beyond it, the stairwell abruptly opened into a cavernous chamber sheer and black as the void itself. The faint yellow light came from a small flickering lamp hung by a bent wire near the vault ceiling, barely illuminating the space below. The chamber stretched wider than the narrow stairwell had suggested. The walls were covered in strange graffiti, words, and symbols that seemed undecipherable, scrawled over decades or centuries. On the floor lay a trail of wet footprints, fresh and glistening, disappearing deeper into the gloom. Martin's instincts screamed to run, but his feet betrayed him, dragging him toward the darkness. Trying his phone one last time, the light blinked and died, the battery drained. The last connection to the world he knew had been severed. There was only this strange, ancient chamber deep beneath the city. Moving forward, he noticed shapes shifting in the shadows, large crates stacked high, scraps of paper, forgotten metal debris. His flashlight beam fell on a crude wooden door set into the far stone wall. It was cracked slightly open, swaying on rusted hinges with a creak that sent ice through his veins. Compelled by an odd mixture of dread and curiosity, Martin pushed the door wider. The room beyond was even darker, but he glimpsed something scuttling across the floor, a rat or worse. Then he heard breathing, not his own, but deep, rhythmic, deliberate. The scent of earth and decay hung thick in the air as his flashlight fell on the rough surface of a table strewn with old documents, torn photographs, and a dusty lantern. Some papers showed maps of the city, including underground passages he'd never heard of, marked with illegible annotations, symbols repeating again and again. He stepped back suddenly as the breathing grew louder, a low growl in the darkness beyond the doorframe. There was something alive here, something waiting. Something that did not want him to come further. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him with violent force. The beam of light jumped wildly as Martin spun around but found the door was locked fast. His hands pounded against the dry wood, the metal handle cold and unyielding. Then silence. The breathing stopped. The flickering lantern overhead creaked and sparked, threatening to go out. The weight of the darkness pressed close. From the shadows emerged a figure, a man, dressed in tattered clothes, face obscured by grime and a dense cowl. His eyes glinted with terrible intelligence, wet and wild. "You aren't meant to be here," the figure rasped, voice cracked with age and warning. "No one comes down these steps and returns." Martin's voice caught in his throat. "What is this place?" he managed, trying to keep calm. The figure stepped forward, revealing old scars, hands clasped tightly. "A graveyard. For the lost souls of the city. Buried beneath noise and light, forgotten in darkness." Martin's mind raced. A city buried beneath its own city? Secret halls below the subway? A crypt for those no one mourned? Why the stairs? Why keep leading down? Martin asked, desperation growing thick in his chest. The strange man shook his head slowly. "Because at the bottom, there is truth. And truth will consume you if you seek it." The walls seemed to close in, the darkness thickening. Martin's heart hammered. The sound of dripping water echoed across the chamber, mixing with a faint whisper that seemed to emanate from the very stones. He realized then that this place was not just a forgotten basement, but a trap, a prison forged by time and silence to ensnare any who dared descend too far. "Get back to the surface," the figure warned, "or you will never leave these steps behind." But Martin's feet twitched, torn between retreat and the unyielding pull toward the unknown. He thought of the signal, the endless stairs, the flickering lamp. Was it fate that had brought him here, or something darker? Before he could respond, a sudden movement flickered behind the stranger. Shadows twisted grotesquely in the lantern light. A cold dread seized Martin's bones. The breathing resumed, cold, chilling and deliberate, not human. The man's eyes grew wide, wild. "We must run," he said breathlessly. "They come from deeper still." Martin nodded. Together, they bolted through the heavy wooden door, plunging back into the stairwell where cold stone and endless steps awaited. Higher and higher they climbed, the groan of the city below growing fainter with every step. The scraping sound returned, behind them, slow and unrelenting. Martin snapped his phone's flashlight back on, illuminating the dreadful pursuit. Shapes emerging from the darkest corners, eyes glowing, limbs twisted. They sprinted upward, lungs burning, sweat slicking skin. One misstep and the falling would be death. Near the 100th step, Martin's foot caught again on the uneven stone. He tumbled, scraping his palms. The figure reached down, pulling him up with urgent strength. The stairwell suddenly floodlit as they broke the surface. The cold night air rushed in with the sound of the city full and vibrant around them. The rain had stopped. The familiar hum of traffic buzzed overhead. Martin's phone instantly found signal. Frantic messages flooded through. The man exhaled shakily. "You made it," he whispered. "But you'll never forget 99 steps down, or what waits below." Martin looked back over the railing. The stairwell seemed smaller now, just a tunnel leading down, not endless at all. But in his heart, he knew the truth. Some descents never end, and some signals never return. For more stories, like and subscribe.